210 long days. That has been the wait for Norwich City and a Carrow Road win. It has ended at long last. The last time Norwich City won, it was Jack Wilshere walking round the pitch. It was the final day of the season. Now it is November, it is cold, and we are dusting off the Christmas decorations, not us in here just yet. Welcome to this week's edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast. After Norwich City's win over QPR at Carrow Road this afternoon, 3-1 to mark and round off a week where Philippe Clement has got improvement out of this Norwich City group. 4 points from a possible 6. I'm Connor Southwell, Paddy, Davitt and Sam Seaman join me. Feels like a while since we've done a podcast. No pod last week after Birmingham. This man was there on his own. I think me and Pad were busy with other stuff, and Chris Lakey, of course. But we are back this week to bring you a full show. Paddy, that was better. That was improved. Feels better. Is the overriding feeling one of relief this evening? Do you think?
Yes and no, because it felt to me after Oxford that they probably would just about do enough today. Said on the team news, I thought it would be a home win, but then again, we've said that quite often this season with that club and that set of players, and it hasn't transpired. But what's different? Philippe Clement, that's the difference. And in 3 very quick games, even allowing for the wheels going off at Birmingham against a good Birmingham side, to be fair. But it's a remarkable impact he's had. And he's still dealing with not only existing injuries but further issues and an illness in Jovan Makama's absence this afternoon. So, considering all of that, I think you can't overplay the impact Philippe Clement has had on essentially a group of players who, up to this point, were looking completely bereft of any confidence or, if we're being brutally honest, even a structure of what they were trying to do, how they were trying to progress the ball, what they were trying to do out of possession. By no manner of means was it, again, everything was perfect and there's nothing to improve on, and he was the first to admit that after the game this evening. Lots and lots of hard work ahead was his warning, and there was no triumphalism from him, that is for sure. But, as you referenced there, Connor, it's been a long time, so I think if you're a Norwich fan tonight, you should definitely savour the feeling and the respite, and the players as well, and the staff, because it has been too long, really, and it's led to another change of head coach and all that rancour and recrimination directed up the food chain to certain individuals. Well, this weekend, maybe we can just park that for now and reflect on a good afternoon of being a Norwich City supporter. In terms of if you've gone to Carrow Road, you've seen a team play in a fashion that was proactive when it needed to be, was clinical when it needed to be, and crucially, and that hasn't always been the case, and there was a setback again today when they scored first, but when they got themselves into a winning position, they didn't fritter it away, they didn't self-implode. It wasn't the Kovacevic show needing to go Pete Gordon-Banks to try and keep them at bay. None of that was required because the structure was there, the composure was there, the clinical edge was there, and that for me is all a reflection, even a week into the job, of the Philippe Clement factor. So it's badly needed in the context of the table and where they find themselves and the points differential to the clubs above them. But the world tonight, I'm sure, feels a much happier place if you're anything to do with Norwich City.
It does, and I think considering the scenes we've seen at Carrow Road, and it was only Leicester, wasn't it, a couple of weeks ago, where there were protests and the players were being frog-marched around the pitch by police to get to a coach. You compare that with the scenes at the final whistle today, jubilation. As we said, it's been a long time, 210 days, and I think I saw a tweet saying you could watch every single episode of EastEnders ever in that time, back to back, and you still wouldn't get to 210 days. So that illustrates the period of time that we've seen, Sam, and I think that those scenes followed by, and we'll speak about Philippe Clement in a bit more detail in a moment, but synergy was the word that he used, unity. It felt for the first time in a long time like there was some togetherness in that place.
Yeah, definitely was. You talk about 210 days, and obviously factually that's as long as it's been since the last time they got a win. But if you really break it down to the last time they got a kind of meaningful win, or the last time that Carrow Road really felt positive, What was the last? You might not have this, but the last home win under Torup.
West Brom?
When was that? March, something like that. So
Yeah, March, April.
yeah, so it's been like even longer. It feels like it's been sort of 7-8 months since there was a kind of genuine, tangible, positive feeling at Norwich and a win that really meant something, rather than obviously the dead rubber that Cardiff game was. And I think probably a lot of people will have almost forgot what it feels like. Certainly to me, I was almost surprised by the level of celebration, the feeling, the atmosphere that there was at Carrow Road. And I think part of that was probably that it was stronger and bigger than maybe it has been or it is for normal wins when they're winning games regularly. But I think it was also because most people who go to Carrow Road regularly have genuinely forgotten what it's like to leave the place and see kind of smiling faces and to see happy fans. So I think it will have meant a lot. I think it probably helped, I mean, you kind of referenced this with how Clement talks about it in terms of the unity, and I think that was true on the day and it was helpful on the day. But I think going forward it's really, really helpful as well, because there are players there who you could actually see getting closer to the fans and kind of celebrating with them and things like that. Oscar Schwartau I thought was a good example. You saw the way that he went off, and I felt a bit bad for him, but the way he went off and celebrated when that fourth goal went in before it was maybe incorrectly ruled out for offside. And you did feel like there was that bond between players who have kind of been almost, football players by numbers at times, because they've come into the club. They don't have any positive associations. The likes of Pelle Matson, Mirko Topic, even I know Jovan Makama is kind of liked by players, by fans, but there aren't many moments where they can say they've bonded with him and enjoyed experiences like that. Basically, all of the signings in the summer, some of the signings even of the previous summer, felt like just kind of footballers there doing their job. Whereas now it feels to me more, having seen that interaction between the players and the fans, like there's something between them. And you look back at kind of the good times of the club, when they were winning the championship. The last time, obviously, it was during COVID, but that time when everyone, or loads of Norwich fans, went and stood outside the City stand, and you could feel that bond all the way through the 2018-19 season, basically. And I think for all that Liam Manning got wrong as Norwich City head coach, probably the takeaway I would have from that is that he talks a lot about experiences and how they kind of bring you together and you learn from that as a group. I think
he spoke about the coach breaking down, as that was one of his examples in his first speech that the club put out, if you remember back in the summer. You probably don't. But
I don't really, but when you said coach breaking down, I assumed you meant him sort of towards the end of his tenure, and when he couldn't deal with it anymore, with his players and things. But I think what he said about experiences and stuff, maybe he's been proven right, because these players have had to go through a lot of negative experiences together, and you could feel that relief in the group. And although I didn't see all of it, and maybe you two can say more about what that felt like, that moment kind of between the players and the Barclay. From what I saw, it was as real of a connection as I've seen between Norwich players and fans for several years now. So I think it was a really important experience. I think for all the reasons Paddy talks about there, the unity was important to get the win over the line, and that's what Clement kind of mainly talked about after the game. But I think it's going to be really, really big going forward as well, that they've now had that moment together, that the players know the fans are behind them, that the fans know they can make an impact on the players. And hopefully they can take that forward and produce afternoons like that on a more regular basis.
Yeah, and we will come back to this. I don't want to burst anyone's bubble, but of course it has to be a start, doesn't it? It cannot be, one swallow doesn't make a summer, of course, and it needs to be backed up now with performances and results consistently. But as Paddy said earlier, just for tonight, just for tomorrow, I think it's something that we can sit back and enjoy, because there's not been too many of those moments for those of a yellow and green persuasion this season. Paddy, let's speak about Philippe Clement, because I think we can talk about kind of manager bounces, and I think sometimes they can be mythical. They can be like a unicorn. It can be quite a mythical thing that doesn't always exist, and is something that we kind of tell ourselves, I think, a lot of the time. But I think it is hard to understate, based on, obviously we weren't at Birmingham, Sam was, and I think by common consensus it wasn't great, but it only had 3 days at that point. This week, Oxford was an improvement in performance. I felt they deserved to win that game, really, and it was a late sucker punch today. I thought first half they were tremendous. Second half, they managed the game, which is something we haven't seen this Norwich team do this season, and that's largely because they haven't been in positions to do it. But even when they have been, they've conceded goals and moments, and they didn't really have. Kovacevic, you said earlier, wasn't really worked in that second half. 1 win, 1 draw, 1 defeat, 4 points from 9, but I'd probably stretch that and say it's harsh to include Birmingham in that. 4 points from 6 potentially. It's a very, very decent start for Philippe Clement at Norwich City.
And let's get it straight. I mean, if they don't, revert back to type a little bit in the 95th minute on Tuesday, that's 6 from 6. And given what's gone or not gone before at Carrow Road, that would have been a very, very big statement of intent early on. But that's how close they were to it. I think, we don't really, it's probably a bit early to start eulogising about a guy who's only been in the building, a matter of days, as he himself is the first to admit. But put it in my pointers today, this is a guy who's come from Glasgow Rangers, a massive club in terms of the scrutiny. We saw how it did for Russell Martin very recently. You don't come out of that environment if you can't handle the pressure and the expectancy and the focus on the scrutiny on every decision you make. And that is a guy who's come through that. He's been winning league titles in his homeland, serial winner of league titles. He went and managed a club as big in France as Monaco with some world-class players that he helped fashion. Every stage, every link in his coaching chain would lead you to think that this is, and his experience as well. As a player, he was was an international for Belgium, played in the Premier League briefly, but still his career as a player.
There, didn't he? He was itching to get that in there.
Well, didn't say who for, but but this is, you look at him from afar, you look at him close up as we have done now in the last week or so, and this is a serious operator, and he knows what the game's all about, and he knows what he was going into as he was at pains to stress, but he also clearly is able to decode in double quick time, even with the hand he's been given, a club languishing in the bottom 3, a club riven with dissent, protesting fans, fractiousness, fury towards individuals wherever you look, and then once in the building he's got 9 or 10 injuries. He comes with that piece of paper for his first, I think it was the Birmingham Presser, with 9 names on that were unavailable. Since then, Mirko Topic has gone down for the season. No Makama, as we said earlier, and then Jack Stacey looks like he's done a hamstring in the second half. So, and you look, and graphically illustrated by the bench, the makeup of that bench today. You've got 2 or 3 raw academy talents, and he turns to Mundell Smith in the second half. You've got Tony Springer, hasn't really kicked a ball, very inexperienced, and yet easy to look at that and think loads of mitigation, but no, not a bit of it. Every time he's asked about adversity, it's well, I'm a glass half full guy. I can only deal or focus on what I can control. And they feel like small sound bites that he's throwing out there, but the actual positive messages that he's giving to his players, to the fan base, it's basically, well, yes, we've got a lot to deal with, but no matter, we'll crack on and we'll come through the other side. And as he did today, he dealt with that adversity. All those unavailable players, even in the second half, as I say, when Stacey goes out of the game, he's got to bring Duffy in, positionally switch McConville. It's really impressive. And it's what it is a head coach who has been around the block numerous times and has operated at some big clubs in some big pressure environments. And I don't think he's going to get fazed by what he's walked into at Norwich. And that's a very reassuring thing to look at from externally, look inward and think that as bad as it looks when you look at the league table of late, I don't think there is real cause for alarm that they're not going to scramble themselves out. How high they go is obviously, will play out in due course, but it's not being complacent to think that they won't. For me personally, they won't go down, but equally, it is a reassuring. If you're a Norwich fan now, you're looking at that and you're looking at that guy today and looking at the Oxford game midweek and you're thinking, dear me, in the space of no more than a week and a half now, he's had that uplift on this group of players who couldn't buy a win at Carrow Road, who looked so disorganised, disjointed, so lacking in confidence or any self-belief, and he has restored ample amounts of all of those qualities and attributes in less than a week and a half. It's as I say, it's really impressive, and you're now actually quite optimistic looking at it and thinking, well, as he said after the game today, hopefully he'll get some of those injured players back in the next few days, the ones who haven't been available. He'll have another week with no midweek game cycle to work with these players on the pitch, off the pitch, tactically, technically, and you can only see them going to Watford as it is now next Saturday and kicking on again and getting another result. And if they continue to go on that upward curve with, as he himself said, the cautionary note, there will still be missteps and there will be still, some probably difficult games because that is the nature of the Championship. But I think the trends now and the curve now feels like it's going to go in a positive direction. And, there is probably an argument still to be had that did they delay too long or did they persist too long with Liam Manning? But then there's no guarantee Philippe Clement would have been available if they'd have looked to make this change weeks ago. So just got to be thankful that they did make it. He was available. He did fancy the challenge, the opportunity, and then on the evidence of the first week or so in the job, not just what we're seeing on the pitch, but obviously that's the most obvious interpretation of his impact. But you can clearly get a sense from the players that off the pitch, week to week, day to day, the staff as well. He's just giving everybody a lift because they can see, as a leader, as somebody who wants to drive this forward, he is somebody you look at and you think, yeah, he knows what he's doing. We'll follow him, and I think we'll be okay. And that's, I'm sure, if you're a Norwich fan now, you're looking at it, fearful where this season was heading, and now with the big asterisk that there's still so much work ahead, and he's the first to admit that. But you think in him, you have somebody who is a real safe pair of hands. And not only that, but, if he gets the time and the backing, as you hope he will do, that he will actually be able to put this club on a footing which is able to try and achieve that objective that Mark Attanasio and Norfolk Holdings have said and have stated, and I'm sure will do in the coming days at the annual meeting, the Premier League. Now, that looks fanciful when, the season's careering down towards League One, but I think in the mid to longer term, with this guy in charge, with the right people around him, then you have to be fairly confident that the things are given. But they now have a head coach who maybe marries up with where Mark Attanasio, Norfolk Holdings see this club ending up. And that, unfortunately, probably wasn't Liam Manning and maybe wasn't even Johannes Torup, both of those for different reasons. Looked like coaches who are still finding their way, still relatively young in their career paths. I think with this guy, they've got somebody who's much further ahead, has had many more experiences at the top level of the game in various different countries, working with various different types of players. And there is far less of the gamble about Philippe Clement, I think, than the previous two incumbents.
I'd boil it down probably to two words: his impact, which is authority, intensity. I think those are the two words that have spun around in my mind. And I think it's difficult. Of course, there was the late goal against Oxford, and I'm not really holding anything at Birmingham that as digestible in terms of Philippe Clement, given how short a time he had in the window and window he had, with the players, some of which were on international duty. I think he had a day with Kenny McLean and Maroon McConville ahead of that game. So I think it's hard to attribute anything. He was in charge in name only, really. But barring that late Oxford goal, it's hard. It's an argument that he's not really put a foot wrong in anything. You look at today in terms of that decision that Paddy spoke about. I think a lot of eyebrows would have been raised when he called Shane Duffy to come onto the pitch and he moved Maroon McConville to right back. But it worked. Jacob Wright as a number 10 worked. Decisions that were bold. And I go back to the Mate Jurasek one in midweek where, would the other two coaches that Norwich had the balls, for want of a different phrase, to pull Mate Jurasek off 16 minutes after introducing him? I genuinely don't think they would have done. And it wasn't just the boldness to make that decision, but it was also the way he managed it. I mean, I went into the press conference on Friday thinking I'm going to ask him about it and he's probably not going to give too much of an answer and it's a closed chapter and he's got an opportunity to go again. But he did answer it, and he was willing to answer it. And I'll use a kind of a cricket analogy for me. It's felt like instead of having someone in the crease who doesn't leave their crease and wants to defend and wants to not get out, he is a guy who's willing to step out and to meet balls head on and to play some shots, for want of a better word. I was going to make an England reference, but I won't do that with the way the Ashes have started. But it's just there's a presence about him, Sam, that I think has really hooked people. And clearly, again, very early days, and you don't want to overhype it, but you can only judge it in this week. And in this week, he has got more out of this Norwich City group than certainly his predecessor managed in however long, 15 games or so.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've kind of you've highlighted the two aspects there that, again, I think have been the major thing, and probably what we've seen over the last few months, the last couple of years at Norwich, is how important man management is, because I suppose you could include David Wagner in this as well, because he seemed to really get the best out of the players, even though fans weren't happy with his tactical ideas necessarily. He probably didn't have the best squad, and he maybe didn't have the right ideas longer term in terms of the makeup of the squad and things like that. But you could see and you heard everything about how he got the players going, and he got them performing. Then with Johannes off Torrent, we all know how that panned out with the man management side and the atmosphere at Colney, and how that played into the decision on his future. And then with Liam Manning, it almost felt like it went the other way, that he was almost we know he was well liked behind the scenes, and the players were reasonably happy coming to work, in terms of how the work panned out and how they felt and enjoyed themselves and things like that. Obviously, they wouldn't have been happy with the results, but it felt like neither of those coaches got the management balance quite right. And then you get Clement come in, and I almost do get kind of a David Wagner feeling about him, not necessarily with the tactics or the preference for much older players, but in terms of the authority and the presence that he brings. You can tell that he's someone who can command a dressing room, and I think, to be honest, if I was in that dressing room, I'd want to work pretty hard not to get that stare, because it feels like even his eyes are pretty intense, and you kind of that doesn't really seem to switch off. So I think there's that presence that probably Norwich needed when you look at the last two coaches, and finally, for me, it feels like they've got that right. But also, in the same way that we can criticise Liam Manning for talking too much about behaviours, etc., coaches, much like players, need to be able to make the right passes and finish their chances and things. Coaches need to be able to pick the right teams, choose the right tactics, analyse opposition well, and then communicate that to players. And you highlighted a couple of the examples, and I think, to me, it shows how many he's got right. When you started speaking about that, I thought you were going to go to certain examples. You went to ones that I wasn't even thinking of. So he's already got several right for me. Having Mark Ondes in there today instead of Matthias Quiscoren was
Which on Tuesday night was bold, by the way, because he wasn't great on Tuesday night. And I think me and Paddy, probably in the team news, were a little bit surprised that it was Mark Ondes.
I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned, to be honest. And he would have known as well. He's not an idiot. He would have known that every person who saw that team news, or the large majority, especially those who aren't related to Mark Ondes, would have been shocked by that, probably disappointed, would have been questioning why that happened, especially when Quiscoren had scored 3 goals in his last 3 starts, or last 3 games, going into that Oxford game. So it was a surprise even for the Oxford game, to be honest, let alone this weekend and this afternoon. So I was surprised by it, but Mark Ondes goes and scores the first goal after 9 minutes. It's probably more his sort of game than it was Oxford, and I thought he was pretty good. And then the explanation afterwards, I thought was really good, about how he basically feels that Quiscoren and Sargent right now can't really play together, and that the balance isn't quite there. When that happens, which again is a ballsy move, because not only because of the fans and things like that, but because your boss Ben Napper has spent loads of money on Quiscoren, and you've got to then show to him, or not necessarily tell him, because you won't have to justify the team selection to Ben Napper, but you are sending the message that, look, I know you spent 7 million on this guy in the summer, but I don't think it's right for the team, and therefore he's not going to be in my team. And again, that's another ballsy call. So yeah, I think he's done really well with those elements. The Jurasic example is a really good example because I thought he actually worked his socks off today, and you could see that he was a different player. And I didn't actually know when I kind of saw what he had to say about Jurasic when I read your quotes and what he told you about him. I didn't know, to be honest, if that was just PR, because that's what a lot of head coaches would say about a player who they completely had enough of and who would never play for them again because you've got to then sell them at some point. So I didn't know if it was just going to be PR. But the way Jurasic ran today, I think he was absolutely correct. He looked like somebody who's been asking for extra work, who's been hungry and has reacted in the right way. And to take that risk and then to get that response shows how good of a head coach he is. So obviously, as Paddy said, it's quite early to be eulogising about his capabilities. Norwich are still 23rd in the Championship, so he's definitely not got them out of it yet. But I think when you look at how many individual decisions he's already got right, he's got a lot right for a week and a half.
And I think that speaks to the experience. That speaks to probably his background, Paddy, in terms of that willingness to make the big decisions. As Sam said there, to leave out Matthias Kriskor. He scored 3 and 3 before these two games, and he's decided that the balance of the team, he doesn't want to sacrifice that, and so he doesn't play. Matej Jurasic, as we said, isn't giving him what he wants. He comes off. Someone else goes on. These messages that he's sending, not just to those players as individuals, but as a collective, is powerful. I felt genuinely, and this is the first time I felt this about a Norwich team for a long time in that first half today. I thought they ran through and they ran over QPR in terms of the way that they pressed, the intensity of their play. And I spoke to Paul McVeigh in the week, and again, I don't want to make this comparison because it's so early, and like you say, you can go over the top of these things, but purely in terms of what it's like when a new manager comes in, when the team isn't doing very well, because I think that probably is the most pertinent example. This is the lowest ebb this football club has been at since probably that Paul Lambert change. And he spoke about the early impact that he had in terms of he just pushed the floor up. And that kind of feels like what we've seen this week Clement has done. He's just pushed the floor up. He's raised the standards instantly because, yes, that incident on Tuesday night was about Matej Jurasic, but it also felt like it was aimed at all of them in terms, and he said it in the behind the scenes video the club released. He demands stuff of players. All of this it feels like it's been geared to, in just put a rocket underneath the whole thing. But equally, that's been balanced off, as we saw today, by a very good structure, by very good coaching. And again, we only can limit it to what we've seen this so far, and that's these 2 games this week. But all of that stuff has made an impact. I think we've seen that pretty clearly.
Well, yeah. I mean, we're talking what we feel are in his toolkit. Some strong, no nonsense attributes, but also don't forget he said in one of those early press conferences about the questionnaire. Was it pre-Birmingham where? There's an empathy there. He wants to understand his players. He wants to get inside their heads. He's got to short-circuit the process because he hasn't got 6 weeks of pre-season with no competitive games. So every lever that clearly you would expect in a head coach, in other words, in more base terms, it's not just the carrot. It's got to be stick as well. And the better head coaches, even in the modern game, are able to find that balance because it is still, for all the far more sense that the game as it is now compared to 10, 15 longer years ago is more tactical, more data-led. At heart, it is still about getting a group of players to perform for you and to manage very different egos, very different personalities and different attributes, younger, older, some melting pot, any good changing room should be. And, on the evidence of what we've seen so far, then picking it up from where he did as well, that's the most impressive thing. You're talking about raising the floor, but they were. I mean,
it was a mess, wasn't it?
Well, the line that you came out with at the start, the last home game, players have to be escorted inside the stadium footprint by police to get out the ground. So can you imagine what the mindset was inside that dressing room at that point in this season? We had those unsavoury reports, whether you take them at face value or not, that there was players' families were not able to get out of sort of the stadium for the game before. Was it the previous home game? Really unsavoury stuff and a real toxic environment around that group of players. And yet, he's almost managed to go in and in a week and a half, almost turn the page mentally, in terms of the mindset amongst those players, individually, collectively, almost cleanse, all the negative elements around that, which is no doubt going to impact on their performance levels. And they've now playing with a freedom, and we saw it for the first time probably against Oxford. We saw it certainly in that first half today. You talked about the intensity and running over players, running over teams, and that's a freedom. That's a loss of inhibitions almost. That's a self-belief and a confidence which he has instilled in them, because it hasn't come from a winning run of games or turning draws or defeats into draws and picking up results that way, because it come off the back of a Birmingham debut defeat, and they were well beaten there, and there was more questions than answers. So, I think all this segment that we're discussing here just comes back round to what I said at the outset, which is, you have a head coach who is battle hardened and has come through some very bruising career coaching postings to get to this point, and he's ready for this. He was asked again today about your relative lack of experience as a manager in England and in the Championship, and again he kind of, his answer was almost like he took that as a bit of an offensive comment, that he knows what the Championship's about. He might have managed in it, but football is be all and is end all, and whether it's anecdotally people he knows who have managed in the Championship, you referenced Vincent Kompany previously, or just basically a guy who is totally immersed in the game and would be fully briefed on what to expect going into the Championship. You have to say, on the evidence of these first 3 games, particularly the 2 now at Carrow Road, that is the case. That there's no sense, let's be honest, we had that with Torrop, that he was almost learning on the job. No sense, maybe like with Manning, that the job was too big for him, if we're being brutally honest. From the career steps he'd taken to get to Carrow Road, this job isn't too big for Philippe Clement. If anything, Norwich are very fortunate to manage to get a guy who has been at Rangers, has been at Monaco, has been top end of Belgian football, to get him to Carrow Road. And at the moment, you can see, if you're a player, I mean, we're not privy to the day in, day out inside the dressing room, but it's evident that those players have really responded to his messaging, to his stick, to his carrot, and the result is these very impressively cohesive displays already. Not perfect, clearly, but still a tremendously transformative feeling around this group of players, and that, as I say, is just a signal, I think, that they now know that they've got a head coach who they want to impress, but they also don't want to get the wrong side of, and that's evident in terms of the performance levels. And it's really interesting to see where, just this season now, where he can take this group without wanting to get too carried away, because they're still, as we speak here, still in the bottom 3, still got a lot of work to do to get out of the bottom 3. But if he can really catch with this group of players and they get a bit of luck with injuries, and maybe they can be quite astute in the January window in terms of adding to the squad, just how fast he can accelerate this sort of development from here, because the early signs are very encouraging.
Yes, and there are going to be defeats, and and he said this, and bad performances, and days where it doesn't fall for them to come. But I think one of our colleagues said it as we left, and I'm sure a lot of fans would have felt this way as they were leaving the ground. It was belief that kind of you leave with, and hope, and that's there's been a real hopelessness about this club basically since that last win at Blackburn, when entered that international break, and it was the end of the transfer window, and Josh Sargent was still here, and the mood felt relatively good, even in spite of one of their better players moving to Ipswich Town, and the performances hadn't been great at that point. But that was the last time there has been hope and belief and at least a willingness to feel optimistic, which all of that has been beaten out of everyone, I think, at this football club over the last 13, 14 games, and to then immediately shift it to the 2 performances that we've seen, where we should be sat here today talking about 2 wins from this week. This team had won 2 games this season when he came in. That is remarkable to achieve in a short space of time, irrespective if he goes on to lose the next 5 games. This week has been a positive start, but that's what it has to be, a start. Part 2, we're going to speak a bit more in depth about what happened today alongside some of those impressive performances. See you in a second. Welcome back to the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast, reflecting on their first Carrow Road win of the season against QPR at Carrow Road this afternoon, and what felt like liftoff, or hopefully at the start of liftoff, under Philippe Clement. Sam, let's reflect a little bit on the game today, because and I mentioned it in the first part. That first half performance feels as good as anything we've seen from Norwich City this season, and I think, for me, the element is, I think there's always a perception when you're down and you're in the mire and you are in the drop zone, that there's only one way to get out, and that is you have to be solid and you have to have resolve and you have to scrap and you have to score from set pieces and be really, really tough. But actually what I liked about it was kind of what I said earlier, that ability to run through and over QPR, the way they press, the structure, but also their intent of their play, wanting to get forward, to play forward, to create opportunities. It's not something we would associate really with a team on the run that Norwich City have been on.
No, and I think the intent was important, and definitely it is hard to, when you know that the whole stadium is feeling pretty negative. You're in a really bad position in the league. Sometimes it can be hard to look up and take that risk and know that if you play a pass, there's only a 20% chance it might come off, because it's a difficult one, and then there's an 80% chance everyone's going to groan at you. And when things are already bad enough, that's a difficult risk to take sometimes. So I think the players, to be fair, because that's not something Clement can do for them, need credit for that. But also I think there are a few tactical things in there that probably really helped them. Me and you were talking about the fact that they have been playing out with a 2 in midfield, whereas a lot of what they've done under different head coaches has been playing out with a 1. So under Wagner, it was Kenny McLean dropping into basically a back 3. Sometimes Marcelino Nunez did that. With Manning, it was still only 1, and even if they didn't drop into a back 3, it was often just McLean basically being there to kind of bounce the ball from one centre-back to the other. Whereas I think because Clement thinks more about playing out from the back, not necessarily in a kind of tore-up philosophical way where it's almost dogmatic and you don't really have another way of doing it. But I think Clement does still realise it's a good way to create chances. Having Maatsen and McLean in there, I think, really worked. And for me, as sad as you feel for Mirko Topic, of course you don't want to see any player suffer an ACL and lose the rest of their season like that. As soon as I thought about the alternatives and how they might work, whether it was Pelle Maatsen or Jacob Wright, I did feel like both of those players would probably work better in that role than Topic did. I think maybe actually, as much as I was praising all of the team selections that Clement has made, maybe if I could have made one change, it would have been putting a Maatsen or a Wright in there, because I think both of those are pretty good ball players, and if you give them a situation where they're not necessarily all pressed. So like with McLean, again, he's another good example of a decent ball player at championship level who can play those passes forward. But when you're only passing out with one player, it's so easy for the opposition team to press, because they all know either Harry Darling or Rory McConville has the ball or Kenny McLean has the ball. So if you want to stop the ball going forward, you just put 2 or 3 players on Kenny McLean, you rush to him every time that they want to pass the ball forward, and it's pretty easy to defend against. Whereas McLean and Maatsen both had a bit more breathing room, because the opposition defenders, the high press, had to then deal with both of them, and that gave them more space. It gave them fewer opposition when they got on the ball, and I thought that allowed them to progress the ball through the thirds a lot easier. Marcondes having a better game and kind of linking up with Josh Sargent more easily also helped. So individual quality is also important in that sense. But I suppose for me, it was further evidence of the fact that yes, behaviours are important, mentality is important. You do need that ability to run and that physical ability that I do think actually, as you kind of mentioned earlier, the whole Jurasek situation has helped. I did feel there was more of an understanding looking at that team that they absolutely must give everything they have if they want to be in this team. So that helped. But it shows again that all of those things aren't the only thing that win you professional football matches. If they were, then you would get loads of people coming out of the stands who would give as much passion as is physically possible, because they love Norwich City. You need the the technical quality and the tactical decisions need to be right. And I thought, along with Clement doing some things to help out his players in a tactical sense, I thought the players then delivered with the actual quality, which obviously helps. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's probably 4 or 5 players, Paddy, that we could sit here and single out. Pelle Matson, Rory McConville, probably for the 2 performances, has stepped into the back line. I think Harry Darling's dragged his level up. Kellen Fisher, I thought, was outstanding today. And even that, and from what Sam said there, that improvement of structure, the way they are pressing. I mean, you look at it for the second goal, that comes from effectively the way they press Sam Field and force him into a ball forward, and then because he's under so much pressure, he heads it out under basically no pressure out for a corner that Norwich win and then they score an own goal from. Those are the type of stuff that we just haven't seen from this Norwich City team. And who knew you put the players in a certain structure that works and you begin to get that confidence and those individual performances back.
Well, yeah, I mean, we were walking up from the ground and you don't want to make this about Liam Manning, but how often do we hear about it was about under his stewardship, about empowering players and letting them problem solve. Didn't work. Now, whether that means these players aren't capable of that type of instruction, play what you see almost, or whether they just, at this stage, with the regressive trends, they needed more structure. They needed to be told more about what you need to do. And then you can build out from that, obviously, if you get into a much healthier position, maybe in terms of the league table, in terms of wins on the board. But there's no ambiguity from what I can see under this guy in terms of structure. And the evidence for that, for me, is in, Kovacevic in these 2 games hasn't really had to produce anything approaching the saves, the volume of, the quality of that he was doing earlier in the season, because the structure around him is much better, it's much more secure. Of course, within that, both the Oxford goal and the QPR goal, some of the old frailties were evident again in terms of not sensing the danger, not reacting quick enough, too static in their own box. So, of course, it's still a work in progress. But overall, there's absolutely no doubt, the structure under Clement is night and day, really. And if you're a player and you're in a structure that feels more robust, more residually effective, can only bring up your own levels of performance, your own confidence, your own belief. I look at Oscar Schwartau now. He was probably one of the very, very few who was doing anything of note under Manning. Well, I think in the last 2 games he's been excellent. He's got that drive, he's got that intent, he's wanting to take on defenders now.
And that's the point I was going to make. You can see him engage and take on players now. We just didn't see it. It was always kind of running past them, wasn't it?
He looked anything but the player that he was being asked to do in that role. It looked like a square peg in a round hole, whereas now, he looks comfortable and he's carrying a threat. He isn't just an engine who can go up and down that flank. He's actually, there's a bit of creativity and a bit of technical ability from him as well. And, you see Forson on the other flank. As we've discussed already, I thought Marcondes, it was the type of game where he could show what he was about today. So, yeah, there's absolutely no doubt in these 2 home games this past few days that the structure has been... Well, there has been a structure, if we're being brutally honest, and I don't think that was the case too often. It didn't look like that, and the results and performances would suggest that wasn't the case. But now they look like, even when they're things aren't quite going their way, and they're facing a little bit of adversity, that they are set up in a way that they can come through those periods. And then conversely, when they are on the front foot, that structure is allowing them to magnify any advantage they can get in these games. And even today, a set piece threat, and that hasn't felt too often the case, really. That the deliveries that are coming in now from wide areas, whether it was McLean, whether it was Schwartau, real probing deliveries. They're getting runners, they're getting people attacking balls. The Marcondes goal is made by Rory McConville winning that header to keep that ball in the box, and just little elements like that we wasn't seeing under his predecessor. And I'm sure that isn't just a coincidence. I'm sure that is the work they're doing now, video work, training ground work, patterns of play, that Clement and his coaching staff have spotted and that have managed to start to instill already in double quick time. And the byproduct of that is we've left Carrow Road in these last 2 games, and you can see what Norwich City are trying to do to actually win a game of Championship football. There's a pattern, there's a cohesion, there's a as I say, there's a template that even in 2-3 games under Clement is a major step forward from what went before. And the tantalising prospect is now, where will this group of players get to under Clement the other side of Christmas? February, March, April. What will it look like if it's already looking now that it's good enough to beat a QPR? Should have beaten an Oxford, but got a point. Then roll it on another 4 or 5 months with some of those injured players back, with a January transfer window, and it is really optimistic, I think, to feel what impact he's already had, but what he could actually do with a real body of work with these players.
Sam, I thought to single in on one player, I thought Pelle Madsen today was excellent. I think we've probably. I think there's been enough evidence there that I've seen that there's a talented player within there, but probably, again, for structural reasons, the balance of the team not being right. It's a tough gig coming into English football and being then thrust into adversity straight away. All of those elements are difficult. But for me, we've seen the technical elements of him, how he can pass, the way he can pass. We saw it with the goal at Stoke, stands out in my head, and it was the ball through to Stacey, was it, from Makama's goal? That kind of proves that he's got that in his locker. For me today, it was the tackles and the amount of them, and important tackles at important times as well. They're the bits around the edges we haven't quite seen from him. So yeah, he's one player I'll throw into the mix. I'm sure maybe you can feel free to talk about him or to throw another player in the mix, because we're in a world where we're drunk on positivity, so we may as well utilise that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what you've said there. Really, I was thinking exactly the same about the kind of the tackles and stuff, because I didn't associate that with him as a player. I had felt, to be honest, that he was a little bit underrated at times in other games. Not that he's been perfect, but I thought he maybe had more than his fair share of criticism. And I can understand why that is. I think in a lot of ways he kind of embodies a lot of the things that fans are angry about. He was brought in, obviously, to replace Marcelino Nunez after the PR gaffe that was selling him to Ipswich. He arrived from Denmark in another example of probably a data-led transfer from a league that isn't especially comparable to the Championship, and he kind of, to be honest, is a representative of, as I said, the things that people are unhappy with. But I think there have been some positive signs. But yeah, today for me was head and shoulders his best performance in a Norwich shirt, and it was exactly that. I wasn't surprised at all by anything he did on the ball. I think he's been very, very solid on that front. But it was the quantity of the tackles. It wasn't just one moment where you went, okay, fair enough, he's got that in his locker, he's up for it. It was like 4 or 5 times and it wasn't just the desire or the passion or the intensity. It was the timing. The tackles were timed absolutely perfectly. I think there were probably 3 or 4 where if he'd got them wrong, it would have been a foul and a yellow card. But he got every single one right. And I think, given they've now lost Topic, who was supposed to be kind of the muscle in midfield, they've not got too many players who offer that. I think him having discovered that and having developed that under Clement is fantastic news for Norwich going forward, and really helps that balance, because it felt like, to me, with some of the options they had, Topic versus Wright, things like that, Forsen, look at Forsen versus Makama. So often they've had to choose, the head coaches, when they pick the team, have had to choose either physicality or technical quality. Whereas with Madsen, you have a bit of both. And I think it's similar with McLean. And you look at those two as a midfield, that's a really, really well-balanced midfield for me, if he can then continue to produce it. Because, like I said, he hasn't shown that side in many of the previous games, and both of us were surprised to see that. So he has to prove it wasn't just a one-off, that it wasn't just a good performance, and that's something that's firmly in his locker rather than just something he was motivated to do today. But I thought he had both sides of his game. I thought he was really, really good. And given you gave me the opportunity to eulogise about somebody else, I'll quickly touch on McConville, because I think he's come in, and probably the best thing, or the best compliment you can give him, is that it looks like he's played loads and loads of games at Championship level. When you consider actually how few games he's got in his career, I don't know the exact stat, but I would guess the number of professional starts he's had at club level is probably less than 10, must be less than 10, or at least close. And he looked today like somebody who's got 100 Championship appearances under his belt, knew what he was doing, has a bit more pace than a Shane Duffy or Jakov Medic as well. So again, he kind of offers both sides of his game. I don't think he's an incredible progressive passer or anything like that, but has the side of it in possession, wins headers, and as we've seen, knows what he's doing in the box as well with his second assist within a few days. So I think it's a massive win for McConville, who only a few weeks ago you would have said, his career, you almost felt sorry for him. He'd gone from playing no games in the Premier League to playing no games at the bottom of the Championship, whereas now it looks like he could be a kind of long-term centre-back solution for Norwich. So really encouraging performances from both of those, both of whom I think have shown attributes in the last few days that maybe we haven't seen from them previously, which is a great sign both for them going forward and also for Clement and his coaching abilities, I think.
Really lovely lad, Rory. Really lovely lad. Go and watch his celebrations for both of the goals. They are they're nice moments. And I guess Paddy, I was going to Sam stole your thunder a bit. I was going to throw McConville and Fisher at you and tie them together as a kind of youthful impact that he's got out of both of those guys. I thought Fisher was very good in the second half against Oxford and was good again today. I think he got man of the match in the stadium. And Fisher's playing out of position at the moment as well. To add to that. Those are the type of things that Norwich are going to need between now and the end of the season if they are going to get themselves out of the situation they're in, particularly at the moment with the injuries that they've got. They are going to need guys like those two young, maybe some people who haven't played much football this year, to really step up and take some of those opportunities. I guess we could throw a Mankwa Forson in here. I didn't think he was outstanding today, but he scored a very, very good goal. The touch with the outside of his foot to create the space is excellent. People taking opportunities, young players taking opportunities. Those are elements, again, that we've not seen this season.
No, and Clement referenced it, that everybody who felt he came in today, be it from the start, be it later on in the game, contributed, and by definition that needs to continue to drive them up and out of the situation they're in. I don't think it's necessarily the younger elements, but if you are a younger player, you see that. You see the trust that he places, like Mundell Smith coming on again. And maybe Mundell Smith's nowhere near it if they don't have this list of injuries at the moment. Elliot Miles was there just before the game as well. He's hopefully just on the cusp of at least being in a position where he can train fully and push himself forward as well. And but I think it's important to stress, where they are in the table. You would be surprised if they tip it too far towards youth, because that's probably where it sort of started to unravel under Torop this time last season. So maybe it was enforced in terms of the injuries they had, but that's why I think you need some more of those senior players available, and that's why it's a bit of a concern. We'll wait to see on Stacey, but that could impact on Fisher. We might have to see him back at right back. And it's just whether a case of, one of Schlupp, Mahovo, Krezeni are in this tranche who Clement is intimating might be back in short order. But yeah, if you're Philippe Clement, all you want, I guess, particularly with the younger cohort, is like McConville has shown in these last two games, get an opportunity. You're not happy maybe that you've been kicking your heels, so when you get your opportunity, take it. And he certainly has done for me. And it's also good on a broader macro level because it's one of the pieces of recruitment that was seen as this is what we're about, and we don't need to reopen that debate at the moment. But it is pertinent that a young player who came in with the pedigree to be one that they could develop, much like with Jacob Wright, hasn't happened for them. You would have to say thus far in a Norwich shirt over the entirety. And if those players can now start to emerge under the guiding hand of Clement and actually go into a Norwich 11 and impact it and look at home in that environment, then it maybe offers a bit of a counterpoint to the idea that all the recruitment is necessarily under Ben Napper not worth for purpose, because Clearly, that isn't the case. Probably got the balance too far wrong overall. But you put those players in a Clement side, and hopefully they go on and prove what they're already showing now in McConville's case, and the Makama has had that impact as well. So, you start to think that, okay, maybe it's less the players who come in the door, and maybe it's just the timing in terms of, in the here and now for where Norwich found themselves in the wrong end of the table. The balance was too far the other way. But, again, probably comes back round to having a head coach who has that experience to just, at the right time, expose these players and then bring them back out again, and within the broader contexts of trying to get this club up and out of the bottom three.
Absolutely. I mean, if we look at the Championship table tonight, Norwich City now on 13 points, which is almost nosebleed territory given where they've sat in recent weeks. 4-point gap now to Swansea and to Portsmouth, who are in 22nd and 21st. 5 to Oxford. That gap has remained after Oxford beat Ipswich Town on Friday night. Sheffield United winning at Leicester, although I don't feel they're going to be in the conversation around this for much longer, if I'm being completely honest. So Norwich, of course, head to Bramall Lane in a couple of weeks, which is kind of where I wanted to frame the next point, Sam, because I can already hear people, it's been too positive, it's one game, it's really, all of that stuff is absolutely true. My retort would be, come on, folks, we've had so much misery, and we all know the issues, and that we could do another hour on the recruitment and Ben Napper. I don't think we'd say anything new and fresh on that. So it's nice to have something different and something positive to get our teeth into. But this does look like a tricky run coming up, and I guess to forward look to it, this is now going to be the test of all of those elements that we spoke about in terms of Clement and the improvement. Can Norwich go and do what they did today away at Vicarage Road, at Bramall Lane, against an informed Southampton team when they come to Carrow Road? And that is going to be the real test, because to get out of where they need to, I feel, in these 6 games between now and January, I think they probably need 3 wins probably to stay on course of where they need to. Maybe it's 2 after this we'll have to go and recalculate, but they're going to need more wins out of some pretty tough games, and this is going to be a really good test of just how much improvement they've had under Clement, with obviously now a full week of training as well, which is a luxury he hasn't had.
Yeah, and that was why I felt like it was so important for them to get the win today, because it was going to be their best opportunity to kind of get up and running in that sense for a while. I think now that they have got the win, they'll have more confidence going into those games. As you said, the week's training probably helps, and I think those fans who are travelling to Vicarage Road will be buoyant in that away end. So I think it all helps. I do agree that it's a massive run of fixtures now, not just because it's maybe slightly, it's quite difficult. It's hard on paper, and I'd say it's even bigger because ultimately we know they've got plans in January. We know Philippe Clement has already helped Ben Napper draw up some of those plans, and they'll want to attract the best players they possibly can. If those players think there's a good chance they're going to be in League One next season, then I'd suggest the best of them probably won't be coming to Carrow Road. So I think they'll want to be in a good position as it relates to safety when it comes to January, and kind of trying to attract players. So I think that's really important. But what I would say about it being a difficult run on paper is just look at the points separating those teams. Obviously, there are some teams who are better than others in the Championship, but the margins are so fine that, for me, getting a win today almost it could be 3-4 times more important, that sense of momentum, that confidence, than who they're playing. And there are a couple of teams up there. I think if they were going away to Coventry again now, that you
it must be boring for you lot, mustn't it, Pad? Winning every week. Come on, let someone else have a turn.
Yeah, well, I don't think it would be Norwich that they would let have the turn if that was the game, to be fair. But if it was them, then I wouldn't be saying this stuff. But I think there's a huge block of teams that are just so much of a muchness, and I think it's an opportunity for Norwich regardless. So yeah, the fixtures might be ever so slightly harder, but for me, momentum is maybe even the biggest factor in the Championship this season, and now they have some. So I think it's more positive than negative for me looking forward.
Paddy, to take it away from kind of off on the pitch stuff, AGM this week. What are you expecting that to look and feel like now off the back of what has been a week of positivity? Of course, it doesn't undo all of the stuff that has gone before, and all of that stuff is still there. But it sounds like it's going to be a slightly different AGM to maybe ones we've experienced in the past.
So the sense is, yeah, I mean, it's probably still to be inked in terms of formats and what have you over the coming days, but the sense is that probably reflective of, this is no longer the sort of directorial makeup that it has been in the Delia and Michael era. I mean, it always used to be you'd have that show of hands and a rotating one or two directors up for re-election at the start of these AGMs. From what we're led to believe, that won't be the case this time round. That's not a mechanism that is now in play, because it's obviously, the shareholding is heavily weighted now in terms of Mark Attanasio and Norfolk Holdings. So I think the more procedural type of presentation, going through a PowerPoint almost style document or a dissection, of the accounts, I don't think we're going to necessarily get that. But what we might end up getting is a bit more of an informal sort of opportunity for shareholders in the room to maybe quiz the likes of Attanasio, Richard Bresler, who's, you can almost say, the silent partner in Norfolk Holdings. He's not, to my knowledge, done too much in terms of external media. Obviously his expertise is real estate, and I'm sure it'll be interesting to maybe, if that is the case, that to get his sense of the whole Carrow Road footprint strategy in light of the pause being pressed on those previous plans, and then maybe in the second part of the AGM, I think it'll be the more traditional kind of opportunity to quiz the executive, maybe Ben Napper, Zoe Webber, and those types, again shareholders. So interesting. But ultimately, I guess it's now against a backdrop of a head coach coming in the door who has already now proven in very quick order that maybe he is a far better fit for where Norfolk Holdings see this club being driven in the mid to longer term. Clearly, those issues around Ben Napper and his suitability to be still involved in this process mid to longer term, whether shareholders wish to engage on those topics, who knows? But they will have the floor, they will have the opportunity to do it. So we'll look forward to seeing what that potentially brings. But from where it could have ended up, in very short order to what it will be now, by no manner of means is anybody going to be thinking that Norwich is now out of the woods, on and off the pitch, and that everything is now going to be positive and plain sailing from here on in, because that would be to airbrush a lot of what has led to this point and the fractiousness that has erupted over the last month, 2 months, 3 months, ultimately leading to the change of head coach. So I'm sure that sense will be expressed by certain shareholders, and it'll be interesting, what the view is from, as I say, the people who probably matter most now in this equation, because they are directly responsible for where this club is going, where it's heading, what the aims are, and on and off the pitch. And but the fact that on the pitch, at least now under Philippe Clement, that it feels like there's a sure pair of hands driving that element, and a steadying of the ship. I'm sure that they'll be keen to accentuate that and just reinforce that at what their level is, which is directing the sort of strategy and the business objective for this football club moving forward. That there's that alignment. You hear that word a lot, alignment, but I think we need to hear probably midweek that probably acknowledgement again, as Mark Attanasio did, as Ben Napper did to a point, that things have completely careered in a downward spiral, and they understand that is the case, but maybe restating what is the direction of travel again, and how they see it moving forward from here, and maybe what lessons have been learned. I think that would be all very illuminating if there was anything of that nature midweek. But yeah, so from what we're led to believe, subject to confirmation, it might be an opportunity to hear from the likes of Atanasio, the likes of Resler, for the first time as a duo in front of, a live gathering of key stakeholders, in this case the shareholders. So I'm pretty sure there'll be some tough questions, but Atanasio, I thought, was, at least he spoke from a position where this is a guy who, by his own admission, doesn't understand every nuance of what it is to be in charge of a football club in England, but he certainly is coming at it from a viewpoint where you look at his business background, you look at his background in terms of American sport, and I think he very much has an idea and a strategy and wants to execute it in a way that he believes will ultimately, as he said more than one occasion now, is to get Norwich into the Premier League, but to sustain themselves when they get there. And that feels very long way in the future at the moment, but maybe we'll get more of a sense of even if there's a slip now in terms of the timescale, because there was this 5-year thing attached to it, and obviously subsequently now they've had to make 2 head coach changes in relatively short order. Does that then alter in terms of the timescale of this? So anytime you hear from the ownership, you would hope you would walk away from a touch point of that nature, maybe understanding a little bit more about what their mindset is and where they think this club can get to and where they are right now. And but it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting in terms of the shareholder view. It wasn't shareholders, I know, but you were at the Lion and Castle event where it was a lot of loyal season ticket holders who were very upset with those proposed Carrow Road revamp plans and their eviction as part of that, to use that phrase, and express that dissatisfaction to, on that night, Anthony Rickens and Zoe Webber. Let's see if that anger that was there in that room on that night, if that resurfaces, if there's any of that, in terms of an AGM setting. Whether that is the case or not, the reality is, this is now about looking forward rather than, what's gone before. And, that's why I think it is important that whether it's Atanasio, whether it's Resler, whether it's any of the executive, that the tone is right and that there's an empathy towards those shareholders rather than what felt like leading up to the departure of Liam Manning, that it was too often a fan base, a shareholder base being talked at and not being consulted. And I think this is another opportunity now for them to show the people who are, as I say, the key power brokers in this equation, that they are actually listening and that they understand and that they know they've made mistakes, but they're actually now seeking to maybe acknowledge those but then move forward. And maybe Clement is the first signal that that they are now trying to move this in a positive direction.
Will we get a question about sausage rolls? I think that's always my big thing from the AGM, or various other food type pies we've had in the past and all sorts as well. Right, to end the pod, here's a question for you, gents. Sam can probably see from the phone that I'm looking down. That's all right then. What do all of these things have in common? Nirvana, Radiohead, Arctic Monkeys, The Prodigy, Amy Winehouse, Pulp, Verve, Stereophonics, Paul Weller, Ellie Goulding.
I definitely know, actually.
Go on, go for it.
They played at the Waterfront.
They have played at the Waterfront. Do you know who you can add on that list in a couple of weeks?
I'm going to leave it to you.
You can add the PinkUn podcast to that illustrious list of names, and it is a very good list of names as well. I could go on. The Darkness,
You missed
Foals.
Ride, who are by far the biggest band.
It's not on the list I've got in front of me, so
I was there.
not that big.
Gig.
Blink 182, I've heard of them. The Proclaimers, there's Avril Lavigne, Limp Bizkit. There's lots of names on there that people will recognise. Ashton Marigold, of course, part of JLS. Oh, yeah. So there's lots of big names that have played the Waterfront. And Sam, we're going to be there as well.
Yeah, 13th of December, after the Southampton game, when Norwich will have won. How many will they have won on the spin then? 4?
Oh, I thought you were going to go goals. I was going to say at least 5.
Oh, yeah. They probably would have won 5-0.
Yeah.
And picked up some easy victories between now and then as well. So everyone will be feeling good, and we'll all be able to chat about the playoff push by then. And the tickets are only £10. We're all going to be there.
Can meet Paddy Davitt in the flesh.
When I first met Paddy Davitt in the flesh, it was one of the best days of my life.
Yeah,
So
okay.
I would recommend
And
it.
you can get that for
Definitely.
£10.
£10 only.
Do you know, was somebody said to me today, because there'll be about an hour, I think, or so from the final whistle to when we pitch up, roughly. And it was almost like, well, you can go do your Christmas shopping, and then if you've not done your Christmas shopping, then come along and listen to us clowns talk for an hour in front of a live audience. But actually, on the music theme, good friend of ours.
I thought you were going to say you're going to sing then. I thought that's where that was going.
No. We want to put a few people on the gate, surely, not turn them away. But I'm led to believe by Dave Powles, formerly, editor of the EDP, amongst other things, that there's a 90s top event on as well, music-wise, Britpop. He runs nights with his business partner, John Rogers. So... basically, we'll just get in the way. It will be the warm up for it. If you want to come and listen, to or relive the 90s experience, then just, and you've been to the game, then we're just the sort of filling in the sandwich in between. Basically, that's about all there is to say about it. I don't think.
I desperately want to go down the segue of what sandwich filling would be, but
No,
we're already an hour and 10
another.
in, so we better leave it. We better leave it there. But we will leave all the details below. Hopefully, if you watch us regularly or you listen to us regularly, you can come down. It'd be great to see as many of you there as possible. As Sam said, December the 13th, after the Southampton game.
What time?
At the waterfront. What time, Sam? Don't know. It'll all be on the no. It's lunchtime kickoff.
It's 12:30.
It is a 12:30 kickoff. Yeah, definitely not that. But all of the details will be there in the link. You can click that. If you're watching on YouTube, we'll leave it down in the description. If you're listening, we will put it in the like the show notes of wherever you're listening on, and they're also on across all of our socials as well. You'll be able to find the link, and we'll be doing a lot more plugging of that in the weeks to come as well. Thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the week, and we can all marvel in a Norwich City win. Thank you very much for watching and for listening. We'll see you next week when the Philippe Clement Norwich City train has hopefully continued to motor along the tracks. See you soon.